right, good afternoon, WBRT. This is Jim Brooks, here for a very special interview. Congressman Brett Guthrie has joined us on the WBRT studios here on South 3rd Street. And he's making the rounds and thought he'd stop in, and always happy to have you, Brett.
It's always great to be here. It's always great to be here in Bardstown and Nelson County, and I'm proud to say I still have Bardstown in my district. I hate to say that I don't have Cox's Creek or Bloomfield, but I have most of Nelson County. The way that the districts went with the depopulation of the eastern part of our state and the western part of our state, Hal Rogers and Jamie Comer had to grow, and they kind of grew into me and into Thomas Massey's district, so the northern part of because he had Spencer County. Mm-hmm. So if you come in from Spencer or Bullitt, you'll be in Thomas Massey's. But for the most part, I have Nelson County, so I'm proud of that.
Right. Well, I'm a 2nd congressional district person from the heart, though I live in Cox's Creek.
Are you going to be? I didn't realize we're going to lose you in that. Well, I hate that. I hate losing anybody, but certainly hate losing you. But Thomas Massey's a good member of Congress.
Oh yeah. Well, Congressman, I know that there's a lot going on in the news. And
I was just in Brussels.
That's right. Talking to our allies.
Our NATO out. So the NATO headquarters is in Brussels. Mm-hmm. And I'm the Republican leader of a delegation that went to discuss what's going on in the world, and particularly Ukraine,
right,
with our fellow parliamentarians or members of Congress from the 30 countries. And with Jens Stoltenberg, who you hear his name quite a bit. He's probably unknown as the Prime Minister of Norway, but as the Secretary General of NATO, you're going to hear a lot from him recently. And just trying to size up our allies and encourage them to join us, because the problem is, and we can get into we have plenty of time to get into the whole kind of thing with it, is that Germany and particularly Germany, but other countries. Well, first of all, in NATO, you got the Baltic states, which is Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, who just detest Putin and everything he stands for, because they chose, along with Ukraine, who's not a member of UK, they chose to look to the West,
right,
and be Western-style democracies and raise the standard of living of their people. That's what they want to do. Putin doesn't want that, because he doesn't want to see standard of living rising for other countries, because it'll prove that his system of dictatorship and authoritarianism doesn't work. And so we were all kind of meeting there, but Germany, because of their adoption of their version of a Green New Deal, has made themselves completely dependent on Russian energy.
Right.
Because of President Biden's signatures on January 20th, 21, it took, in his version of the Green New Deal, he hasn't got it through Congress, but the things he can do with executive order have stopped us from being energy independent. So as of today, we're importing Russian oil, which is just absolutely flabbergasting, isn't it? And we have been, because we are dependent, because we stopped producing oil in North Dakota, because of the Keystone Pipeline and all the other things moving forward. And so, as we're over there, and the rhetoric from the Germans, we couldn't have agreed more. Now, the question is in the details, as you sanction energy, as you sanction Putin himself, and I know that's at the heads of state level, not at the congressional delegation level. I'll tell you, if our side had control of it, we would pass a bill to sanction Putin personally. I don't know how you don't sanction them personally and feel like you have legitimate sanctions moving forward. But the rhetoric was good. But what I spent probably more time than not is working with my Democrat colleagues who were on the traveling with us to try to get them to encourage President Biden to unleash American energy. This is going to hurt us. The sanctions are going to hurt us, because we've chosen, President Biden has chosen, and the environmentalists who fund a lot of the Democratic candidates, limousine liberals, if that term is still in vogue, don't want the Green New Deal and environmentalism, and so he's going to have to face them and say, look, and even if he agrees in man-made climate change and all the chaos that may come in the next 10 years because of all the predictions that are out there, that even if he believes that, he's going to have to say, we're going to have to relieve ourselves, and particularly our European allies.
Right.
And we're going to have to produce oil. And the problem, though, is you can't just do it, all right, for the next 6 weeks we need oil. It takes investment to bring this back online. He's going to have to guarantee them that he's not going to go shut them down for the 3 years, the end of his term, or we're going to be it's just subject to the world energy price, which we weren't 2 years ago.
Right.
When Saudi Arabia bombed Iran, excuse me, the other way around. When Iran shelled the Saudi Arabian oil fields in 2018, price of oil went up a dime, gasoline at the pump a dime for the day, and then it dropped back below because people had speculated and realized America was energy independent. And that's what I spent a lot of time focusing on.
Well, it's hard to sanction your dance partner at the same time, tell them you don't like what they're doing, but yet you still have to do business with them.
Well, and when you don't have to. We have another dance partner. We have our own oil. We
Right.
don't have to do business with. Now the Germans are in a different situation,
Right.
But we can relieve that pressure if we produce our own oil and energy to not only take care of ourselves, but we can take care of. We have more oil. People don't realize, because I'm a child of the '70s. When I was growing up in the '70s, when my dad would drive his car, line it up, then we'd push it till we get gas and run back and get him to drive it home.
Right.
And so I remember that. Who would have thought back then that we would have more? We actually have more oil in the continental United States, and in the Alaska in there, it's even more continental United States than they have in Saudi Arabia. We just got to, and then we have more natural gas.
Right.
And you frack to get it, and environmentalists are against it, but you can do it safe and you can do it clean. And what's interesting about it, they'll say, yeah, but you're going to burn carbon when you burn the natural gas and oil. Well, we're not burning oil. By not taking our oil, we're burning Russian oil.
Right.
So the idea that we're helping the environment is just doesn't even make sense. And that's the problem when you have a lot of ideologues who are more tuned to their ideology than they are to making sense, which is what we have in running Russia.
Right.
Who's more in tune to his ideology. And so when we're there and you start thinking about it, I've heard people even as much on TV last night, said if we'd have taken Ukraine off the table for NATO, this wouldn't have happened. That's
Right.
what people argue. And that's just not credible. Because what you argue then is, what you have to argue if you accept that argument, is that Putin put his army at the Ukraine and says, I won't invade if you take it off NATO, because he was concerned about a Western army invading Russia.
Right.
I mean, there was no, maybe in his mind, okay, I don't want to pretend what's in his mind, there is no credible person anywhere on earth that would believe the West was going to invade Russia from Ukraine. And so that's just ludicrous. What he was concerned about, in my opinion, and I strongly believe this, is that he didn't want a Western. Remember, Putin had a puppet in office until 2014.
Right.
Ukrainian people overthrew him, elected a Democratic. What he didn't want is a Democratic government, small d, and with a market economy, because they could see people living free and people raising their standard of living.
Exactly.
The standard of living of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia have increased since they've gone that way, the standard of living of its people. Unfortunately, if you read the history of Russia, they haven't had a standard of living increase in centuries. And they went from serfs to Soviet puppets and now Soviet serfs. Now they're serfs to Putin. It's a shame. It's absolutely a shame.
Well, I saw a documentary just a few weeks ago with all this coming up from that was created by some folks in the area about when they deposed the Russian puppet government and all the lives that were lost in the protests, the massive tidal wave of public opinion that led to that.
Yeah. So when they went into Crimea and lost, and of course Crimea has been, of course, one of the famous Charge of the Light Brigade in the 1850s was the Battle of Crimea.
Right.
So Crimea has been one of those. It's the peninsula in the Black Sea that controls the eastern end of the Black Sea. If I got my geography right, it's kind of like the Dardanelles where Istanbul is. I mean, who controls that? Controls the flow of trade. And so, the Charge of the Light Brigade was like 1856 or something like that. So that's how far back, and centuries before, with the Greeks and the Turks and the Ottomans fighting over Crimea. And so that whole area has known this for centuries. And so the idea that, one, if you just look back on it, and I've been a member of this NATO group for quite a while, and just trying to convince the Germans and the French and others that, things are peaceful right now, but you can't always depend on that. And I think that you get, intellectually, you say, well, in the 21st century, surely nobody's going to send an army into a neighboring and risk another world war in Europe. We've seen that story. We saw World War I where millions were killed, World War II where millions were killed. Is anybody crazy enough to do that again? And unfortunately, history always rises up somebody crazy enough to do it again. And so hopefully, if this settles in a way that's far better than it is today, that it'll wake up the Germans and the French to say we can't always depend on the Americans to pay for everything.
Right. Well, I've been watching all these documentaries, historical documentaries, and The Edge of War I watched recently is about some low-level diplomats working between the German government, Hitler's government, and the British government when Chamberlain was prime minister, trying to convince Chamberlain not to trust Hitler's promises. Anyway, and then
Churchill was the leader of that group, wasn't he? Did they have Churchill in that documentary?
No.
Yeah, Churchill. So you gotta believe what he says.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this is even before the Holocaust was full. I mean, it was just in the 30s where it was horrific, his language towards what he was saying about racial. That's why if you argue the Third Reich wasn't about racism, it absolutely was established on racism.
Right.
But the thing, it gets back to the same point. Wherever you draw a line in Europe, I mean, Europe didn't develop by people traveling there 250 years ago, 300 years ago like we did.
Right.
I mean, Europe, these people have developed for centuries. So wherever you draw a line, there's going to be somebody on one side of that line that speaks one language and one side of the line that speaks the other. And so that was Hitler's argument with Czechoslovakia. The people of Sudetenland, a majority of them spoke German. So he said, well, this should be part of Germany. And that's why the European people said, well, and all I want are Germans. So that's what the same argument that Putin made. And if you think about that part of the Donbass that speaks Russian is only about a third of the Donbass region, which is only probably 20% of the whole country of Ukraine. And he came into the entire Ukraine. But that was the same argument that Hitler made. And then they said, okay, we're going to give you the German speakers in Czechoslovakia, which is now Czech Republic.
Right.
But we're not, don't go any further.
Right. Promise
and
you
then
won't.
he goes, well, there's a group of Germans in Poland. Remember, if you think. And that's what we now call Gdansk, but it was Danzig. The term there's a German way of saying Gdansk. And he went after them, and that's what started World War II.
Well, where's this final outcome going to be? Because, it's interesting because we have to deal with Russian energy, but yet we need to protest what they're doing, but how strongly can we?
Well, we don't have to have their energy.
Right.
President Biden has chosen to make us dependent on their energy. That's anybody listening to this that thinks I'm being demagogic, that's just absolutely not true. We were energy independent 2 years ago. And then President Biden, with the executive order on January 20th, 2021, the Keystone Pipeline, federal lands, and added some environmental stuff that stopped essentially the drilling for oil in the Dakotas. And I've talked to people who work in that. They said if we had some assurances that we'd have 2 or 3 years worth of ability to recoup our investment, that we would drill again. And that's what he needs to do. That's absolutely what he needs to do. Where does it end? We have to sanction to the fullest extent the Russian people. These oligarchs have been flying all over the world. Kids go to the best schools. They buy $50 million homes in Miami Beach. They buy $50 million homes in London. They need to sanction them. They need to take the Russian out of the SWIFT system. And we're going to have to produce enough energy that it'll cripple the German economy not to have. If we don't produce, and we say to the Germans that you have to join us in all the sanctions, but we're not going to give you energy, it'll absolutely cripple their economy. And so that's a tough decision for them, but we can make it easier for them, and they shouldn't make it just because it's on their doorstep.
Right.
So then if he doesn't stop in Ukraine, and he goes, if you look at the geography, to Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, those are all members of NATO, which we have a treaty obligation to defend. And if he crosses into those countries, that triggers American response. By law, it triggers it.
Right. Well, we'll just have to watch the headlines and see how things play out.
Well, we sure hope. I mean, my hope and prayer is that he is not as crazy as he has been up to today. He's not crazy enough to do that.
Right. Well, Congressman, I know that looking a little closer to home, that parts of Kentucky are still reeling from the damage that the tornadoes, recent tornadoes that struck, even that you said in your neighborhood.
That home behind me doesn't exist anymore.
Wow,
it's just when I look out my window, there's one directly out my window, is one just a little catty corner, probably 50 to 100 yards from my house, and it is gone. So we have what happened in Mayfield, Dawson Springs,
Right.
Bremen, which is in Muhlenberg County, which is a new part of my district. So I was visiting there. It's just the devastation is you can't comprehend it.
Well, and this isn't something you get over in a month or 3 months. This is a long-term
Because you have
recovery.
displaced families. You have displaced families in the housing area, particularly in the Bowling Green. Well, think about it. So we have a couple of issues. If you're in Mayfield, a lot of development hasn't happened over the last few years. They're coal country, and they've been Dawson Springs as an example I know more about. It's coal country, so there hasn't been a lot of growth, so you don't have a lot of new homes. All of a sudden, there's no new inventory, and the old inventory gets wiped out. In Bowling Green, people are moving in them as fast as you can build them. And so there are new homes, but there's none available, and so we're struggling to try to find places for people to live. A lot of them are in hotels. The governor opened up a lot of our state parks. That have, because in the winter there are not a lot of people using them in a place to, so we're trying to get people housing. But so I can just kind of give a report on Bowling Green in my district, particularly Bowling Green, Cave City, Park City, and Hart County were the ones that were the worst hit, and there was damage here. I know there was damage up to Bull County, but those were the ones who really had individuals displaced from their homes, and we're still working with FEMA and other groups to move them forward. But in Bowling Green, a lot of the debris has been removed. So whenever you're just driving around town, you would just see piles of trees and piles of rubble everywhere. Look, we were bummed out. I mean, it really had that look that you see on TV. And so a lot of that's been removed. But I was driving down, I know you know the area a little bit, Covington, Nutwood is kind of the old historical, kind of like the historical part of Bardstown, kind of the older, been there for 100 years or so kind of neighborhoods. And I was driving down the other day, and all the debris kind of been removed, and you see some homes missing and homes with blue tarp. But I said, this just looks different. And it dawned on me, the trees are gone. I mean, these are 100 to 150-year-old trees. The guy told me, I was chatting with him about it, and he said, yeah, there was a tree in my yard, had a 5-foot diameter. Wow. So these are old. I don't know if the old growth is the right word for them, but these are trees more. My neighborhood kind of got built out of a cow pasture, so our trees are still 20 years old, that we planted when we moved in. But the trees are gone, and it's just, I can look out I can see other neighbors now. I can look out my window and see homes that don't exist anymore, but I can see other homes. And it's like, I don't remember seeing that before. It's because the trees are gone. There was a big row of pine trees behind us that are wiped out. Yeah. Wow. It's just, but I was blessed that we had minimal damage to our house, but it came that close. It had minimal damage, but there were other people that weren't as fortunate. Right. Just as blessed, but not as fortunate as we are. And they are, the neighbor behind me that's home's completely gone, they were about to move. And he said they had another child and they needed more room, but they're just going to build a bigger house. So, and that on the same plot, so I don't have to move now. But so those are very few stories that came out on they would love to have done it differently, but those are very few stories. There are just really people hurting. And we lost 17 families. I mean, there's 17 people that don't exist anymore. One was on December some people say December 10th. When it hit Bowling Green, it was after midnight. So it was December the 11th, as we say. And that was a graduation, Western's winter graduation. So a guy went to bed that my daughter knew, graduated from high school with, that was going to graduate from Western and didn't survive the night. It's just, when you think we had 2 complete families that were killed, one Bosnian family, one an African-American family. We had a guy who was going to help his daughter, and he was killed on the road trying to get there. And so it's just tragic. Just absolutely breaks your heart to think of. And then you look at the businesses, and people put their entire lives into these businesses that have been, because they hit, if people know Bowling Green, they hit the bypass. So if you go to Scottsville Road, that's more of the chain stuff. Right. Which is all horrific. I'm not dismissing it's all horrific. So I want people to understand that. It's all horrific. But when you go up the bypass, it's like mom and pop clothing stores, mom and pop meat store, mom and pop restaurants. And so it really wiped out people's life savings. And so I guess what I'm saying, if it's a chain, they have resources, they have capital, they can move things in, but you hit people that were completely, and we have the SBA, Southern Small Business Administration, in town trying to help them. But there are people going to make decisions. Am I going to rebuild? Right. Or am I going to do something, you just go work for somebody else? Or I'm going to, and so you have people that are really hurting. Yeah, it's just really still hurting. Even though if you went to Bowling Green, you would think it's sort of back to normal, unless you were right in the heart of the damage. But there are people really hurting.
So your office through constituent services is still working and still helping people?
Yeah, absolutely. So FEMA came to town, and they came in big fanfare, and they brought some really talented people that are set up at not the old mall, the old Sears store in the current mall. And it's an impressive operation, and the people on the ground are wonderful. Small Business Administration, FEMA. We have people that have talked U.S. Department of Agriculture in each county. And so they're here. We're here to help, and we send people to them. And they get things, some about constituent services, and then all this stuff goes up to the agencies. And we've got, 14% of the people have been accepted. The person behind me that tells you his house does not exist was told they don't qualify for assistance from FEMA. And I call him, I said, one of the advantages of living right in the middle of the tornado is that I can call him firsthand. I know the person. I know the house. The house doesn't exist anymore. Well, we're not sure. They were overinsured, underinsured, whatever insured. And so we have a lot of people that didn't quite have, because the values of homes have gone up in Bowling Green. So if you're insured at a certain level, you can't rebuild at the same level you were, or buy for the same level you were insured. And so there's been some private contributions. We're trying to connect people with that. So Jill Biden, Dr. Biden, First Lady, came to Bowling Green and brought the deputy FEMA administrator the opportunity to talk to him. He unfortunately only been on the job for about a week. I was really waiting to get a hold of him. He was new and only been on the job for a week. But the person, because I wanted to share these stories, and the person who was with him, I just said to him, look, we get people that are getting denied. They don't know why they're getting denied. We had a person who called us, so Constituent Services. So we go through all of the effort to get an answer back, and all they said was he checked the wrong box on his form. And I said, well, why don't you, when you deny, say, well, I think you might have filled your form out wrong, instead of, because you're going to have to, they said it was too much work. And I said, well, you're going to have to go through the work anyway, because I guess they think these people will go away. And some probably do. They said, get a no answer and go. And we're begging them. And we're trying to find information, and how can we reach out to them to call us, because a no's not necessarily a no, is what FEMA keeps telling us. So anyway, so I told him, I said, we've got people that don't know why they're denied. They can't figure out why they're denied. They know they had damage and they're getting denied. And I went through a pretty good dissertation of our frustration. And the lady with him says, we hear this after every disaster. And my point to her, I said, well, if you hear it after every disaster, maybe something's wrong with your process. And that gives me a mission it doesn't help the people going through it today, but we have to clean up the process so people get help. And I told the First Lady, and I said it in remarks, is we can't assume that everybody deals with the federal government every day. Most of the people who are applying to FEMA don't deal with the federal government ever in their life, maybe when they get an FHA loan or something like that. And we're making it like they're contractors. They're like government contractors that know the system, and we don't make it easy for them. And we need to. That's one of my tasks.
Well, it's certainly worthy, because I think there's nothing more bewildering than not knowing the reason why. Well, you get a denial letter and say, if you just told me why. Well, that's like the person said. That what happened is they said we don't, and I agree with this. FEMA says, well, we don't help with second homes. And the guy goes, well, that's good, but I have one home. And he checked the wrong box. And all they had to do is say, we don't do second homes. They would have said, okay, this isn't my second home. Let me figure out why you think that is. And we finally went through his file, and it's just not user-friendly. All right. Well, Congressman, I know that from your office that you'd visited the border recently.
Yeah, I was there in early January.
Yeah.
And, when you get back to Ukraine, you hear a lot of people say, why are we worried about the borders in Europe? We don't take care of our own. And that's a fair criticism, but that's a false choice. We absolutely need to take care of both.
Right.
And we need to, and because of what's happening in Europe doesn't prevent us from taking care of what's happening at the southern border. It's just the will of the president to enforce the current law. When I was there, I'm on the Energy and Commerce Committee, Healthcare Subcommittee, so I was really there looking at the illegal fentanyl trade.
Right.
And how the illegal fentanyl comes forward. And they took me to so the first question was, what can Congress do to help you more? And the Border Patrol said, build the wall. And he said, wait, we're going to show you. So we go to a spot outside of El Paso, Texas, where they were literally working on the wall. So it gets back to January 20th, 2021, like I said, about the oil and gas. There was a very important day in the borders here, because President Biden, on the first act in office, signed an executive order to stop the border wall.
Right.
So they took me to that point and said, literally when he signed it, they quit working, because they said, you got to stop. And there was a gap in the wall where the Trump wall is, which is about 33 feet. If you can see the picture, I should give it to you because you can see the difference to the old kind of wall like you'd almost put around a football stadium.
Right.
And there was a gap there because they'd already taken that down to put the new one up. And so the Border Patrol had to kind of just put it back together without spending any money because they weren't allowed to spend any money. So they just kind of, some of them knew how to weld, some of them knew how to kind of like just, putting it together. But the problem is you have so many, because they said the border wall and the remain in Mexico. So we're back to catch and read. So what President Trump instituted, if you come across the border and you have a credible fear of persecution in your country, you get the right to come into the United States and get a court date to determine whether that's accurate or not. So all the migrants are trained as soon as they cross the border, and the Border Patrol gives them, they hold their hands up, have a credible fear, and all of that kicks off a process of what President Trump set up. It's called Remain in Mexico. So, okay, you come across the border, you get a credible fear, then you go back to a refugee camp in Mexico. And that are inspected, and national groups, NGO, national governmental, non-governmental. So they're not sending them to camps. I mean, they're sending them to places that are respecting them as human beings, a quality place. It's not the United States, but a quality place to live. And President Biden got rid of that. So when President Trump put it in, people would spend $5,000, trek through Mexico, go through all the rigmarole, and the abuse these people go through to travel through. It's just, these cartels are evil. And if you come across and then you immediately get sent back, the word gets back pretty quickly not to come. So a lot of that had stopped, those caravans had stopped under President Trump. When President Biden signed that on January 20th, 2021, a magic day, it opened that up again. And so the problem with fentanyl, like if you're going to bring cocaine into, most of it comes through the port of entry, because you got to bring bricks. Cocaine comes in bricks. With fentanyl, you can put it in a water bottle and put it in a migrant's pocket and say, this is part of your cost of going across the border. So if 100 cross in a night and the Border Patrol catches 20, that's 80 that comes through with illicit fentanyl. So illicit fentanyl ties this all together. It's created in China. It's sent to Mexico and brought up through the border through illegal immigration. And it's killing. Why is that important? Fentanyl, 70% of all drug overdoses in Kentucky is fentanyl. And having to say this, so the Chinese know how to change the molecule to make it not definitional fentanyl, and they usually get more deadly and more potent, and therefore it's not illegal. So President Trump in office said anything that, and this is more technical than this, but this is the way to say it, anything that looks, smells, or tastes like fentanyl is fentanyl, and made them all illegal by executive order. You can only do that for 2 years. And so Congress has to come in and broadly make all categories of fentanyl illegal. We can't get that bill passed. There are members of I see your look on your face. I mean, mine too. The reason you can't get that bill, there are members of the Democratic Party that say there are too many people in jail, and they're not going to let another bill pass that puts more people in jail. Well, we could argue, they call it mandatory minimums. We could argue that there are too many people in jail if you want to argue that. But people who sell illicit fentanyl belong in jail. And so right now it's temporary. We keep sticking in spending bills. So on March the 11th at midnight, 12:01, so that'll be March 12th, unless we do something, fentanyl that's killing people will be legal, street legal in the United States. It's just dumbfounding. And so when you see these, when you get frustrated when you watch the news and you see these prosecutors in New York or Los Angeles or Cook County, Chicago, that don't prosecute, and you see somebody that'll get killed, and the person's been in like 8 times in the last year, but they didn't do bail, they didn't prosecute, you think that's a big city problem? That's attitude is in Congress. And that attitude is preventing this bill from passing. And that attitude is allowing fentanyl to be distributed throughout the United States. I'm not saying they want it to be, but it's allowing it to be. And it's killing Kentuckians because of that attitude.
Well, Margie and I have done a number of shows about drug abuse and addiction and fentanyl, even getting legal fentanyl. I can't imagine, but it, and of course during the pandemic, overdoses seem to have soared as well.
Right.
And we've had
well, you throw the pandemic on top of the lack of border control.
Right.
So all of a sudden you have easy access to it, and you're in a pandemic, and people's livelihoods change, and that can bring about addiction. So you make it more likely to be addicted and more easy to get illicit fentanyl that kills you. and that's why we've seen the increase, and we've seen that 70% of all overdoses are, and we were with the drug czar yesterday. He was in Bowling Green. He was traveling around the state with Senator McConnell, and he said the White House's position is to make illicit fentanyl illegal. That's what he said yesterday, and he's an honorable man. He's actually a good man, and I hope that they changed their mind, because that wasn't the case before he said that yesterday. And so it's like the social justice Democrats. It's the limousine liberals who fund campaigns from the environmental side. It's also the limousine liberals who are the justice. You know, they live in gated communities. They have their private police corps. You see them whenever you see these cases in Beverly Hills or New York, and they think it's just the right thing to do for whatever reason. But I'm telling you, if somebody's selling illicit fentanyl, they belong in jail. And then I'll debate anybody on that anywhere, anytime.
All right, well, Congressman, one of the big topics, and I'm a ham radio operator, and so I talk to guys all over the country. And in casual conversation with other American hams, inflation and the price of everything going up is on everybody's mind right now. Is that what you're finding out in the district?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the national media can't cover this up. The two things they can't cover up for President Biden is crime, because it happens, you know, particularly in bigger cities. You know, the people living in the suburbs see it every night on local news. The other thing they can't cover up is inflation, because everybody sees it at the gas pump and everybody sees it at the grocery store. So part of it is pandemic, that the supply chains got disrupted, and therefore getting people back to work. But some of it was decisions. So the Biden administration chose to do the American Rescue Plan, putting $2 trillion into the economy. And after we did the CARES Act, which was for $1.9 trillion, but people were out of work.
Sure.
If you remember, now they put $2 trillion in. The other thing they didn't help with the ports and get the ports moving again when it opened back up.
Right.
But the most important thing is that the price of gas. So even, you know, this cup of water that I have in my hand, I get this out of the faucet, but the cup, you know, has to travel to get to the store. So every single thing that you buy at a grocery store gets there somehow, and it gets there by either diesel fuel or gasoline. And so when you raise the price of gas, you do. So the one thing that we could do today, I mean, imagine if President Biden got today and says, we're going to completely unleash American energy like we had 2 years ago, the price of oil would drop overnight, because it's a market thing that matters. You know, it's speculated.
Sure.
And so it would drop. And people say, well, should you not speculate? I don't like speculation, but they're only betting that President Biden's not going to unleash the fuel, and he could burn the speculators by doing it pretty quickly, and that would make things cheaper moving forward. And then just getting people back to work after the pandemic and changing some of the rules in the CDC. I think the president, I've called on him to end the public health pandemic. I don't think we intended to have this kind. I know as a member of Congress I didn't, but I think as a country, for an executive to have this kind of authority, as the state legislature said, all right, there are emergency situations, but it's not indefinite.
Right. Right.
You can always govern under emergency, find a reason.
Well, Congressman, anything else for our listeners before?
I think we've covered a lot of moving forward. Thoughts and prayers and help with the people for Ukraine.
Absolutely.
Let's hope and pray that Putin is not crazy enough to step into NATO allied nations. We have to be prepared for anything, because I don't think we can depend on him. And then, obviously, President Xi's watching the responses to Putin, and so our European allies. So I call on the president again to unleash oil and gas that we can produce here to help our European allies get through this, because it's going to be crushing to them if we don't.
Right, and I hope we don't see parallels with the beginnings of World War II, where Europe let Germany take Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, and to pacification, and that we believe the promises of no war on any other country.
Yeah, and as Europe exploded, what happened? The Japanese at that time, but in the Pacific said, well, everybody's focused on Europe with time for us to take. Of course, they started that a little earlier, but really going full-blown to try to take over the ruling of the Pacific. Right. And that's what China wants to do, is rule the Pacific. And so this is, there are a lot of, history repeats itself.
Yes, it does.
And we can't dismiss, we always talk about Neville Chamberlain being a kind of a great joke in history.
Right.
By accepting the deal on the Sudetenland. And then you hear people on the left and the right to say that we should have let NATO step away from Ukraine. We should have given the Russian-speaking Donbass region, and then we wouldn't have what we're having today. I just don't think that's credible.
Well, I think it's easy to also criticize Neville Chamberlain. He was a man of that day and that time, and his mistake was trusting.
One of his mistakes. If you look at the men of that time, they came out of World War I. I don't know the number, but millions of British men and women, but mostly at that era, the soldiers were mostly men, were killed. Most of the noble families lost their oldest, most of the eldest sons.
Sure. And
so you're sitting here going, do we really want to be bogged down in a continental war again? And nobody really wanted to, and if they'd have challenged Hitler when he first went into the Rhineland, I mean, he wasn't ready to fight.
No.
But he had a bet that he wasn't ready to fight, but he took a bet that the French or the British weren't willing to fight.
Right.
And so that's why he took, and then finally we let him get strong, and by the time he took Poland, the section of Poland, which he took all of it eventually, was too late to have a quick war.
Right. Well, Congressman, thank you very much for spending time with us today here at WBRT.
Thanks for having me. It's always great to be again. I have Bardstown. You may hear stuff in the news, and unfortunately, like I said, I lost some sections of Nelson County, but I have most of it, and all of it's wonderful, but I have most of it.
Well, like I said, I've been a second congressional district member for as far back as I can remember or cared what district I was in. So anyway, so my heart's still in the second district. All right, well, that's going to do it for this interview, very special interview with Congressman Brett Guthrie. And we'll let you get on your rounds, and we'll get back to classic country music here on WBRT. Have a great afternoon.